Do you ever sit and ponder the age-old question, what would this thing look like if it was a cowboy? I asked that question about these Warhammer miniatures, and in this video, I will do my best to try and find the answer. And I hope you enjoy. How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to Boylai Hobby Time. A couple months ago, I was sent a box from a patron of mine. That patron is named Jahan, the Lord of Cats. Within that box, there were many cool things, including sprues of unused 40K minis, specifically some mounted Krieg. Jahan thought they would make cool cowboys, and I agreed. I'm not that up to date on my Warhammer lore, but from the looks of it, they appear to be Great War era inspired, but from 40,000 years in the future. These particular soldiers ride what appear to be horses, or maybe they're dogs, but upon closer inspection, they may be both. Like my friend David's Great Dane. Can't really tell because their faces are covered by a gas mask. I suppose I could have gone and looked up all the lore for these creatures, and then presented it here like I knew what I was talking about. But instead, I'll just continue to guess, based on what I see. After assembling all the dorses, I threw together the riders, aside from their arms, because those are going to be reworked to fit into the Wild West. Speaking of which, I was excited to have another opportunity to use these miniature cowboy files that I sculpted for some Space Marines a while back. I printed everything a little smaller than I did for the Space Marines because Space Marines are much larger than Krieg. At least, from what it looks like, Krieg are normal humans at 28mm scale, riding on horses that are anything but normal. Cowboy hats have a unique ability, just like sunglasses, and that is they can instantly make the wearer a lot cooler or a lot goofier. It all depends on the size of the hat compared to the size of your head. I think these turned out pretty cool, but if you disagree, you can let me know in the comments. After giving all the riders their hats, I began the other alterations. This gentleman right here got a new double barrel, using some styrene rods, but everyone else got 3D printed lever action rifles or revolvers. Admittedly, I did not follow the instructions while assembling these miniatures, I just wung it. But there were specific arms that were supposed to go with specific torsos, so a lot of the reins were too short. To get around that, I flattened out some styrene rods with some pliers and then cut those to length. I had a lot of fun equipping these guys with their new weapons, positioning them in ways that looked natural, given the speed of their horse and their body posture. And one thing about these guys is that they already come with 4 stalls, which is pretty cool. So they would fit right in to the Wild Imaginary West. One change I made on these animals were the manufacturing numbers on their hindquarters. Makes me think that they were created in a lab or something. Like those mice from Nim. Let me know in the comments if you ever watched the direct-to-video sequel to The Secret of Nim. After the construction, it was time for some basing. These guys are from the Wild West, we might as well put them in the Wild West. The first rider is probably in my favorite pose. He'll be the front man on the album cover, meaning he'll be in the center on the thumbnail. So I gave him a nice rock to stand on, and to ensure that he's nice and stable up there, I drilled holes in both feet. And when I say feet, I really do mean feet. If you haven't noticed yet, these horses don't have hooves. They have claws. Further suggesting to me that they were manufactured in a lab. Or, of course, they're dogs. I glued the rock to the base and trimmed off the protruding edge. After that, I applied some muddy earth texture around the base. And as you can see, I assumed that I was doing this completely in frame. You know what they say about frames. The next rider was in more of an aggressive full tilt motion. I thought it would be fun to integrate some destruction into the base. After gluing the guy down, I snipped up some sticks at various angles and created a fence that was in the middle of being broken through. This would not be optimal for a normal horse, but I think we've already established that these are not normal horses. After that, I put some mud on the base in frame. I followed up my broken fence base with a railroad base. I used a popsicle stick to space out the railroad ties. Once those had been snipped to match the edge profile of the base, I added some styrene rails over top. For this railroad base, I glued down the ballast using some super thin super glue. And I didn't capture this on camera, but the super glue ran off the base while I was holding it at an angle, and it ran down onto my pinky. And there must have been some accelerator on my pinky because it cured really fast and actually burned me and caused a blister, like instantly. So I guess that's a warning to anybody using super thin super glue. Make sure it's perfectly cured before you start picking up a base and holding it at an angle, or whatever you do with super thin super glue. I already had one fence that was represented by these miniatures, but it was in the middle of being destroyed, so I decided to make one that was perfectly intact, and I added a chain to that off camera. One of these guys was holding a pistol in his right hand, firing across his chest to the left. So I took that opportunity to do a little bit of storytelling, like he was riding parallel with a boardwalk and firing into a saloon window or something like that. After the boardwalk base, I made a couple bases in a row using pre-made molded resin rocks. That's always an easy option. When in doubt, just use rocks. One of those rocks was a little bit too long to fit on the base, so I cut it in half and then cut off a little bit of an angle to have this protruding piece. And I'm really happy with the way that this one turned out. I wanted at least a little bit of wild imaginary represented on these bases, so I threw together a little elevated walkway and ran some tubes and wires along the side. Nothing crazy, but just enough to suggest some out-of-place technology. For the next base, I broke out some corkboard. I wanted to do a little bit of landscaping, so after getting 2 layers of the stuff glued together and trimmed down to size, I broke out my Dremel. I went to town carving the beginnings of a little gully. For this one, I threw some earthy texture on the top where the horse is standing, and then some cracked earth effects paint on the area below. This stuff cracks as it dries, and we will see what that looks like later. For the final base, I decided to glue 3 stakes in the ground and tie them together using a chain with some mud. Not really sure what that's supposed to be or represent, but it looked like it fit in whatever universe these are supposed to be a part of, so I went with it. And to be honest, with this last one, I did want to do a little bit more, but it was kind of late at night and I was running out of creative juice. I've also been very busy with other things going on outside of YouTube, so I needed to go home and go to bed. But I was really happy with how these looked as a collection. And the next step, once all of the basing material is fully dried, will be to take them outside and give them a coat of black primer. I rolled out an old hobby mat that I don't mind getting paint on. After those minis had been primed, it was time to start painting. I'll be doing the painting in 2 stages, starting with the airbrush to establish the base colors and the general vibe, and then stage 2 will be done with the brush. The first round of color that I applied was a deep purple. This is a shadow color that was sprayed over the lower half of all the minis, followed by a bluish gray that I sprayed from above. The reason I started with these 2 colors is because the element that takes up the largest surface area is the skin of the horses. From there, I began picking out other colors, starting with the tan for pretty much all of the rider's elements and the harness and saddle. And at this stage, I'm not too concerned about overspray, mostly just looking to get the large sections of the miniature covered in some paint, which also included all of the base elements as well. Next, I went back with lighter shades of each of the previous colors and began defining the light a little bit more dramatically, working my way up smaller and smaller areas on each of the minis. And at this point, they were looking a little low saturation, so in order to bring back some life, I gave some very light coats of thinned down contrast paints. These will help add a little more color interest to the currently fairly lifeless appearance. That being said, I don't think it's a problem if the horses look at least a little bit lifeless. So I went over top with one of the glaze colors being a sickly green. The last wash I went over top with was a leathery brown for the rider and all of the saddle elements. As you can see, the saturation problem had been dealt with at least a little bit. The contrast problem had not. So we'll call this stage 1.2. Moved around the minis with an enamel panel liner to boost the darkness of each of the seams and recesses. The difference in contrast that makes is fairly subtle, But here you can see side by side a mini with and without the panel liner. When that was dry, it was time to break out the wet palette and move on to stage 2. That is the brushwork. I loaded up the palette with the primaries and 3 blenders, which could either make things lighter or darker. Because all of these were painted pretty much the same way, I'll just focus the footage on this guy, who happens to be my favorite of the bunch. Given the fact that these minis are from the Warhammer universe, they are not officially a part of the Wild Imaginary West canon, as is the case with everything that's copyrighted. I've seen a lot of suggestions for things that are from other IPs to be integrated into the Wild Imaginary West, but it just doesn't work that way, at least from the lore and storytelling perspective. That being said, the Wild Imaginary West RPG can definitely be supplemented with your own kit bash minis for human characters or monsters or mechs that are borrowed from anywhere. There's nothing that keeps you from being able to do that in your play sessions. And that's potentially how I see these being used. The Game Master, or Warden as we call them, could definitely come up with a scenario where a group of outlaws wearing gas masks on deformed horses wearing gas masks are the enemy that the players have to deal with that session. Or maybe they're a new faction that the Warden introduces, and they're a recurring enemy. That's the fun thing about RPGs, is that your imagination is the only limit to the fun you can have. And there's plenty of cool miniatures out there to supplement your gameplay with. I made my way from horse to horse, painting in all of the details, like I did with that first one, as well as highlighting all of the base elements that set these apart. As I wrapped up these minis, I realized that the Dorses have an interesting similarity to 2 popular horses in my home state of Colorado. One being their bluish coloration, which reminded me of Lucifer out by our airport. And the other is the gas mask, which is actually worn by a Cold War horse in Rocky Flats. I don't know what it is about unusual horses in Colorado, but we love them. As I look back over this paint job, can't help but think that maybe a little bit more saturation would have gone a long ways. So potentially changing some of the colors from rider to rider could have been a good option. But then again, they are supposed to be a squad of soldiers that go together, so maybe the similarities aren't a bad thing. The miniatures themselves may not be very saturated, but you know what is the dirt on the bases. I mixed up some pigment powders, applied that generously to the bases, and the last thing to do was to paint the rims of every base with a nice clean black. After that, I called it good. That is it for this video. Thank you all so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Huge shout out, as always, to my patrons. You guys are the best. Have an awesome week, everyone. I'll see you next time.